happening around them, to be able to entice them to educate themselves so that when they go out there, they're quite aware of what is happening. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And it really is an honor, see the CEO, and you're taking out that time to actually educate us about the ATM and bank scams that are going on around. And I know it's getting pretty rife out there. I think I'm one of them that's quite a scaredy cat, as they call it. To be very honest with you, I get scolded at time and again with my family because I don't even have online banking, because that's where the fear goes to. So,
oh no, that's about the safest banking you could get.
Really,
digital all the way.
I'm amazed, because I think I'm one of those that are so afraid. I think because at one stage when I was much younger, I had a scam, and people obviously took all my savings and all my money out of my account.
Oh no.
And I think what happens is that element of fear stays behind you, and you start getting backward when it comes to getting technological. So I think this is where you come into play this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time out to join us here on the Nafeesa Dangor Show. Talk to us about, a lot of the times we find that it's the easiest thing, of course, to go to an ATM and use it, because sometimes the queues in the bank, and especially with this COVID-19, are long, and you don't sometimes have that time to actually wait to do what you need to do. So the easiest option is to go to an ATM. What should we avoid when going there?
Thank you for that. That's a good question. So one of the things we need to keep in mind is that many of the banks have moved what used to be traditional services that they offered over the counter in the bank is now available at the ATM itself. So you could actually do many, many things that you once did in the bank at the ATM. So which means you need to be very careful when you're approaching the ATM, because the nature of the transactions you can perform are quite vast. And, from very practical experience, one of the first things I notice when I go to the ATMs and when I stand in the line as well, people often come up to you offering you assistance. And they say, hey, can I help you do this? Or can I help you do that? And the first thing you need to avoid is actually accepting the offer from somebody that is not a banking official. I think one of the mistakes we make all too often is trusting the security guard.
Yes.
We think that because he's the security guard, he's the go-to guy for that kind of assistance. But unfortunately, he's there to keep an eye on the physical security around the space. He's not a bank member, and you should never be sharing your personal information with that individual. So number one, watch out for who is offering you this advice. Make sure you're only engaging with bank personnel. The second one is something a little bit more practical, and that is when it's time for us to insert our card into the machine itself.
Right.
And what sometimes can happen is that we find that as we want to put our card into the machine, the slot is difficult to get into.
Yes.
We find that it jams. Now, there's one of two reasons for that. Either there could be a technical fault with the machine, or alternatively, somebody has manipulated that card slot. And when that card slot is manipulated or it is jammed and you force your card in, your card is going to get stuck. And if the machine has been manipulated, your card is going to get skimmed. And you're going to then fall victim. So what you need to do is make sure that if that card doesn't go in, upon trying the first or second time, do not engage with that ATM.
Right.
And then the next thing you need to watch out for is because sometimes it's very possible, you punch in the wrong number or something of that sort, your card gets swallowed by the ATM itself. We all too often leave the ATM and then try and call the bank and report that our card has been swallowed by a machine. Never do that. Stand right there at the ATM, irrespective of how long the queues are. Call the number that is on the ATM to report the incident, or the number that you have on the back of your card on another card, and report that incident and cancel your card immediately. You'll get a new card.
Right.
But for what it's worth, you have to make sure that your card is disabled from any other person taking possession of it and using that card. So I think these are the three core takeaways that you need to avoid when you're getting at an ATM. Watch out for who's helping you. Make sure you don't insert your card into difficult slots, and then never leave an ATM with your card in it without press cancel.
Now, a lot of people talk about cloning. And I found
Yes.
this very interesting because I needed to educate myself about that, where you put your card into an ATM machine. And I don't quite understand how come it is that, people get to clone your card. And then they start using that particular card to actually do all their fraudulent transactions.
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about how that kind of system works. So when they refer to cloning, what they're doing is they duplicating the text information that is contained in the mag strip behind your card.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is they use special devices that are able to read and copy this data. It's normally called as a skimming device. That's how we colloquially call it, a
Yes.
skimming device.
Yes.
And there's two ways or a few ways for them to do this. One is that they embed the skimming device inside the ATM. That's the terminal where you slot in your card.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a little bit difficult to do because it requires quite a bit of ingenuity to almost replicate the front face of the ATM. They used to do that, but these days it's not so common. Then the other way to do it is to actually do it via a POS device or a handheld device. And that is sometimes when you go to a restaurant, you have a meal, you pay with a credit card, they walk away with your card, and that card can be skimmed. And then I've also come across situations where when you approach a ATM, you complete your transaction, and then somebody who could purport to be a banking official requesting you, hey, I just want to check something on your card. Could you please swipe your card on this machine? And this is where the cloning takes place. It's where a duplicate of your card is made, or they store the information, and then they later on use the information on your card to process transactions.
How would you know that your card is cloned? Obviously, through your notifications, you would see possibly maybe a transaction taking place that you didn't actually go and do.
Yes. So firstly, if you have like some form of online banking or cell phone banking, you would generally get a notification that a transaction is going off your account. So that's the alert. The second thing you could receive is OTPs, and you would then get an OTP for a transaction you are not performing.
Right.
That means you need to get in contact with your bank immediately the moment you start noticing that your OTPs are coming to you, even though you didn't perform a transaction. The other one, sometimes people don't want to do this one, is go and check your bank statements and transactions on a regular basis. If you're going to be doing your payments once a month or whatever it is, just go and look at those transactions. Because in the case of like credit card fraud, card not present fraud, that is where a fraud takes place without your card physically not being there. And this usually happens after they duplicate your information, is the biggest type of fraud that occurs at the moment. So you need to watch out for those transactions. That's the best way to get the alert, and then act on that alert. Don't leave it.
What shall one do if you've experienced this type of fraud? How do you go about dealing with it? Because a lot of the times you find now there's, of course, transactions that have taken place. And how do you actually, does the bank then reimburse you, or how does this work?
Yes. So the first thing you have to do, the moment you identify that you have been potentially a victim, you've got to report the specific transaction, the date and the time, as soon as possible to the bank. And that is because the bank has a department that is going to investigate these transactions. They look into where the transaction took place, which was the merchant that processed the transaction, what kind of information was processed at that time, whether you were physically there or whether there was a copy of your card, or maybe it was an online transaction, or whatever it's going to be. They do a thorough investigation. So step one, report. Step two is the bank's going to evaluate whether the transaction was processed through your assistance, whether negligently or intentionally, or if it was neither, you were not party to the transaction, then the bank's going to consider whether there is any liability, and then they could process a refund for you. So the process involves an investigation and making a determination as to whether you were a victim or you were negligent in the way you went about doing things, and then they either give you a refund, or alternatively somebody has to carry the liability for the fraud itself.
Now that you're talking about that, a lot of the times you find that people get phone calls,
Yes.
claiming that the people claim they're from the bank and they need details, for example, your ID number or your date of birth or things like that. And I think a lot of the time, this is where people make the mistake and not realize that this is something they should think twice about. Because surely enough, I mean, if you're with a bank, they should be having all your details in order. So why would they need to double check
Yes.
it? I think this is where a lot of people have had actually scams done on them, because they've divulged the information without realizing that they're actually speaking to a scammer.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you've raised that. In fact, that has been one of the main types of frauds that have been occurring over the past 6 months. And all banks have been generating alerts to their customers, informing them to please watch out for this modus operandi. What is happening is that in the public domain, there is a lot of data that is being leaked about individuals that historically would have been very confidential. So when you read about mass data leaks all over the show, somebody is harvesting that information, and usually it is fraudsters. And then they take these types of information that is now publicly available, and they use that information to call you up purportedly from the bank. They then engage you, and really they want more information out of you. They want you to confirm the information that they have, and then they want extra information. They want the latest information about, what is your contact numbers. Sometimes they want to know details about your next of kin. All this information is ultimately used to carry out another crime.
Most definitely.
And then they could either empty your bank accounts because they could mimic your identity, or alternatively, they could go and buy assets in your name, and now you become liable. So, it's really an ongoing kind of a fraud. And, it really falls into two categories. It could either be the telephone, which is called phishing, and then if it's online, they would use techniques known as phishing. So, your listeners need to watch out for both of those methods, because that's extremely popular. In fact, it's the number one method at the moment.
I know it's been an ongoing situation. I received a call not long ago, and the gentleman said that he is calling from the bank and he'd like to verify my details.
Yeah.
And I had a very strong stand, should we say, by saying, if you're calling me from the bank, then why would you want to, of course, get further details?
Absolutely.
You have those details already, so what more do you
Absolutely.
need, and why do you need them? Because I have not asked for any specific transaction of any kind, so why the sudden call? And then you find they drop that call eventually.
You are absolutely spot on. In fact, we never ever suggest that you entertain conversations from anybody who wants to validate your information over the telephone. And the banks know about these tricks. That's why they have authentication processes in which they don't ask you for that kind of information.
When it comes to messages, because, as we know, the banks also, of course, communicate with us via SMS. I mean, sometimes they'll send us a message saying they have a particular loan offer or something like that. How would we know how valid that is? Because a lot of the times you notice that these scammers are actually, using the bank's logos as such, and you don't know how authentic this really is.
Yes. So, firstly, it's not so simple these days to be able to do a verification. And that's because they have the ability to be able to mask the numbers that they are using. Sometimes they even reroute numbers that are official numbers, and they reroute these numbers so that they are sitting behind the so-called fake call centers that exist.
Right.
So, but there are a few things you can do. The first thing is that you should actually store the number of your bank on your phone. So you could go onto your bank's website, identify the numbers that they have over there for the fraud center, your credit card center. Sometimes your private banker would have his or her number embedded inside the app itself. So you could store these numbers. And then when you receive these solicitations, you should call them on the number that you have saved and is coming from the bank, and then you do that validation. Never ever call back the number to validate which was originally placed to you from this unsolicited piece of communication, because that's as good as calling back the criminal itself. And so don't follow that method. The method is really independent source of validation that you have identified. Phone the bank, and when in doubt, ask them. They will be able to confirm, yes, it was one of our members that called you up, or no, that was not us. We don't have anything to do with that. So just make sure you can do that independent validation and verification. And on that point of doing the checks, sometimes you get people that phone you requesting you to give them your OTPs. Never ever share your OTP. That OTP number is required for them to be able to process a transaction in your name, and they're going to process that transaction for which you're going to pay for. So if you give that OTP, it's as good as giving the fraudster your credit card to be able to process a transaction for his benefit. So never share that.
That makes sense, because then, of course, you have no ground to stand on once that transaction has been done, because you you divulged the information through to the fraudster himself. So I think I think the best advice we can give people out there is to be just very, very wary and not divulge any information. I mean, a lot of the times I don't only just receive calls from the bank, but other companies as such, saying they have a particular offer, or, oh, they have me for my account of some sort and they'd like to verify and things like that. I always actually just divulge the information back by saying, I will go into the store and sort it out myself. They always say they want updated information, and they're just checking if our information is correct. Why do that? And I think that should ring alarm bells with people to say that this your personal information, nobody's actually forcing you to divulge it. And I think that's our right and our choice in this constitution, to be able to say that I can go into the actual store or into the bank and verify it myself.
Absolutely spot on. That's in fact brilliant advice, and also it's advice that we regularly give out. It's just that these days we recognize that many people bank online, or they prefer to shop online. And as such, we simply say to individuals, don't engage on that validation. If they want you to validate, they will make sure they take steps to be able to engage with you through formalized process, even to the point of calling you up and saying, could you please come into a branch? We want to do X, Y, and Z, and somebody will assist you. Or we will send a banking rep out to you to collect this KYC information, or whatever it may be. But certainly the onus rests on the bank, and you should avoid that solicitation over the phone.
How safe is online banking now? That's my question, right? you need to put me at ease, because my 24-year-old son always scolds at me and says, Mom, I think you're very backward in life. But I think after having that particular scenario happen, what happens is, and I think many people have gone through that, there is that element of fear, where you feel, is it going to happen again, and how do I avoid it? So what sort of advice would you give as far as doing safe online banking is concerned?
So look, firstly, keep in mind that fraudsters generally don't try to hack a bank's app in order to steal your money. That's because that's like the most difficult thing to do, is to try and break the app. They look for vulnerabilities, and usually vulnerabilities come from the way we behave as people and the types of information we give out. So, in the history of SABRIC and in the history of online banking in South Africa, we've never had a situation reported to us where, let's call them hackers, have been successfully breaking a bank's app and entering the bank and stealing your money through that type of modus operandi. You've had online fraud occur because people gave up their credentials through what we've just spoken about as phishing.
Now that you're talking about that, there's something important that I'd like to discuss, and I don't want to lose out on that aspect.
Sure.
Was a while ago, one of the banks, somebody had hacked into their database and accessed all the information of all their clients. And I think there was that element of fear with everybody that, had they hacked our accounts as well, because, that information was, of course, brewing around. So how do you see the banks dealing with this and moving forward? Do the clients themselves have an issue where they have to there has to be a stem of
Yeah.
concern, or do you think there's support structures in
So
place where people don't actually have to be that concerned about it?
yes. So that is an event recently where one of the banks alerted their customers to these
Yes.
issues. Yes, I remember that event. But there's a few important things to keep in mind. When a bank detects that there may be a data breach on the part of itself and affecting a customer, a bank has a legal responsibility to notify you firstly. Then the next step that they usually take is steps to go in, analyze the online profile of its customers,
Mm-hmm.
and secure those profiles.
Oh, okay.
And then they don't only do that within themselves, they also take steps working with other banks
Mm-hmm.
to secure those profiles. So because sometimes a person is multi-banked
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they do interbank transactions.
That's
So
right.
they take steps to be able to protect those profiles across the spectrum. And then they also take steps to create alerts on those customer profiles so that the moment something happens on that account that doesn't look like your regular course of business, then an alert is generated.
Mm-hmm.
So even though sometimes the event takes place, it's unavoidable,
Mm-hmm.
there are certainly steps taken behind the scenes after that to make sure, in fact, you become like superly protected
Mm-hmm.
after an event like that takes place. Your profile becomes far more secure because of the enhanced levels of risk associated to it.
Yeah, it's nice to see that these the banks actually go the extra mile and try and keep their clients as safe as possible. And I think that's important for people to understand that there's no element of fear as far as that is concerned, because
Yes.
the necessary procedures and protocols are put into place as such. Um, I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. What sort of words would you like to leave us with this afternoon? Something
You know,
important that you think people should know?
yes, I think so. There's a few things. Firstly, I wanted to say to your listeners, please go onto our website, www.sabric.co.za. We have lots of information out there about the different types of scams and, the different types of frauds that are happening out there that people could fall victim to. We explain how it works, and you could get a better sense and you could inform yourself a lot more about what's going on out there. The other one I want to highlight is that, we're entering into a season where we envisage that there is going to be heightened frauds around vaccines and people offering you to be vaccinated, and then you're going to be paying an amount of money towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And, just like how we saw the event of PPE scams when
Yes.
COVID broke, certainly we are trying to just notify people to watch out for these kinds of solicitations on these scams and don't get involved in the payment for these types of inoculations. Really, there's an official protocol that is going to go about doing its rounds in terms of how to go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is protect your identity. That's the most valuable thing you own. Make sure you're able to protect your identity digitally if you are working on online platforms, digital platforms, and also physically, in terms of your identification document and your personal information. That's vital to make sure you have, a safe banking profile.
And it's so nice to see that this is happening, because as you say, once you're with an institution, it's that trust factor that's important, and that you're at ease, that with that particular institution, and that your very hard worked financials are being looked after.
Correct.
But at the same time, you also know that through SABRIC and things like that there's so much of and I'm glad that you brought this up. We didn't actually, initially when we just started up, there was a little bit of break in transmission. Just tell us quickly before you go a little bit about SABRIC and its importance as far as the banking environment is concerned, because I think it's very important for people to be able to understand that and then go to your website to be educated as such.
Yes. So SABRIC is a non-profit organization that has been created by the banks themselves. And what we do is we firstly assist banks we played this bridge between the formal sector of the banking industry and then the government sector, where we help to bring partnerships together in combating crime. And specifically, we look at banking type crime, like the stuff we spoke about earlier on. Then we also look at financial crime, dealing with money laundering and proceeds of crime. And then lastly, we also collaborate to deal with physical security around banking infrastructure and banking crime. So those are the three components. And then as SABRIC itself, we also run massive campaigns to educate communities out there about what are the different types of modus operandi we are seeing. We also work with the banks themselves so that we can help them carry out certain investigations and exchange information across the ecosystem itself. And then we have our arm that is connected to global structures, where we work with international banks to identify global trends and then bring these things back home so that we are able to, better educate ourselves on how to build some countermeasures to make our banking system more resilient. So all of this is done in the name of trust, promoting trust, as you've identified it. It's all about making sure that our consumers out there are feeling like they're working with world-class banks and knowing that trust is the currency. And really, between banks, there's no competition in dealing with criminals. This is the one space where we all contribute and we all are willing to share information to deal with criminals out there.
That is so true. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You've definitely shed some light on this matter, and you've given us some really valuable education that we can take back with us and, of course, hopefully have a more safer banking environment within ourselves, because I think it all starts with us. The responsibility starts with us before it goes any further. And I think that this has helped many people this afternoon to be able to understand the importance of not being able to, and as you said, divulge their identities in any way whatsoever. And I really appreciate you taking the time out from your busy schedule to actually divulge this very important and pertinent information to us.
You're absolutely welcome, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to another invite.
I sure am. I think it was a very exciting one. I myself have learned a lot, and I think I've gotten through Nischal Mewalall, over my online banking fears, and I know that I'm in a safer environment, and it is quite okay to go out there and get involved with that. So Thank you so much for that, and we wish you nothing but the best going forward with as far as your awareness and education is concerned. And as you said, we ourselves from the Salam Media Studios would like to, of course, get involved with you further to educate people on a better basis. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
You do have a very good afternoon and a safe one.
Thank you. You too. All the best to you and the listeners. Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye. That was Nischal Mewalall. He's the CEO of SABRIC, speaking to us about all the different types of scams taking place within the banking environment and how we can educate ourselves to be in actually a safer space. Stay with us. We're going to be back with Imran Musa, the councillor of Ward 9 in Lenasia.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate.